And a good morning to you. A little special edition here on a Friday morning. Bill Bender's going to join me here in just a few minutes. We're trying to pick him up on video. So I see him connected, but it doesn't look out like he's live. There he goes. Now I see him moving around. Bill, can you hear me? Let's see if I can pull him up here. There we go. All right, can you hear me, Bill? All right, I still can't. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you. Hang on, let me check some settings here. All right, let's try that one more time.
Hello?
Nope, still can't. I can't hear you. I can see you. I see you moving. You can hear me, but I can't hear you. I'm not sure if you had to come up on another channel.
I
can
have.
you talk?
I'm right here.
Okay, I'm seeing that, but I'm not. I see it on my monitors, but I can't figure out why.
I normally put
moving.
the head.
I've got you potted all the way up. And talk again. Let me look at your settings. Hold on. Okay. I guess I'm going to give you a call because I can't. Everything's here. I see you, but I can't figure out why I don't have audio with you. Everything's set right. I've got you pulled up here in the box. Are you doing it from your phone? Okay. You want to just let me call you on the phone. We'll pick up that audio. I'll keep you in the screen. Hang on. What a way with technology. We find a way to do it. Haven't used this in a long time, so I'm not exactly sure if I was supposed to do something else. I had tried it out earlier. I have to do a little more testing. All right, I got you now, bud. Okay. Yep. That'd be fine. I'm going to put you on the air. Okay, now we're going to make it work. It's just we're going to make it work a little different until I can figure out how this works.
Okay.
Now we got you. Now I've got you. I think you were at, weren't you at Ohio State last week?
Yeah.
For Saturday's game?
Yes.
Yeah, that was, I don't know why, but I struggle with believing in Ohio State and Ryan Day. He loads up on players, and now he's loading up on coaches trying to get those. He owned Michigan for a little while. What's your thoughts on the program? Everybody said they should be the best one in the country.
Well, I think they're the most complete team right now this year going into the second half of this Oregon game on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And the way that they continue to dominate opponents. And, yes, Ryan Day is going to face the big game question as we get closer to the Michigan game, the Big Ten Championship, college football playoff. But he's played in 17 top 10 games. The one thing Ryan Day doesn't do that some of these other schools did last weekend, mm-hmm. they don't lose to unranked teams.
Right.
They haven't lost to an unranked team since 2018. So Ohio State continues to win in that fashion. And So I'm less critical of him knowing that really the only game he's lost the last 3 years is the Michigan game.
Well, and I think there were 5, if I'm not mistaken, 5 ranked teams got beat by unranked teams last week. Does that sound right?
Oh, yeah. 5 ranked teams,
Yeah.
Several top 10 teams, I think 5 in the top 11. So Ohio State always finds a way to avoid that. And I think that's something to keep in mind when we evaluate Ryan Day.
Yeah, and I don't know. He had no head coaching experience when he took the job, right?
Correct.
Okay. And here again, he came off the staff and he had a loaded roster, and a lot of times you can make that work. But Ohio State, it just seems like somewhere along the way, and that was kind of a little bit. I like to, I guess, not fairly comparing, but I want to compare him to Mark Richt, because Richt was the same way at Georgia. He could get you there. He just couldn't finish the deal. And, of course, Harbaugh struggled with that a little bit at Michigan as well.
Fair comparison with Mark Richt, because Mark Richt did, I believe, no, that was Kirby. Mark Richt never got to the BCS championship game. He got close, and he played in SEC championship games. But, Ryan Day has played that's the difference to me is Ryan Day has played in the playoff. Ryan Day has been in a college football championship game, and they played a very good Alabama team the COVID year. So I don't know that worried about Ohio State long term. This team in particular, Lanny, they're the right mix of guys that probably could have went to the NFL. Transfer portal guys like Caleb Downs, Quinshad Judkins have made a difference. And then on top of it, they have this fantastic freshman in Jeremiah Smith that can't be stopped. He looks way ahead of his time.
Right. There was, I think an article came out maybe yesterday or the day before. They're starting to tweak NIL a little bit. They're starting to tweak that transfer portal window. And then, of course, the big story was Shane Beamer had a player that was in his defensive rotation that came in and said, "Coach, I'm going to take a red shirt." And Beamer told him to pack it up and go. I think there has to be more control with this, and I'm not sure when that transfer portal window needs to be, but it needs to definitely be after the season is completely complete through all the playoffs and championship game.
Yeah, and I know they're going to shorten that, but
they went from 45 to 30 days right now.
Yeah, and the coaches are going to try to take back as much control as they can, because, as you know, these college football coaches are control freaks as it is. So that is a trend we talked about a little bit last week that bothers me, that guys will, they want to do what's best for them, but at the same time, that's not the intent of the rule. That wasn't the intent of the red shirt rule or the transfer portal rules, and they're being used differently, and I think that's a conversation worth having.
Well, and the other thing that we just had something to come up here in North Carolina. I don't know if it made news up your way, but North Carolina had banned NIL money on the high school level. No NIL money. And there's a kid, he's committed to Tennessee, plays at Grimsley High School in Greensboro, and he was offered $1 million NIL money, and his family took a lawsuit because he couldn't get it. But the thing that I liked about his NIL deal, it wasn't tied to a school, and it mainly was tied to trading cards, so that they could do trading cards on him and personal appearances and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like an NIL deal should not be tied to a school. If company ABC gives Johnny an NIL deal in college and Johnny goes somewhere else, I think they need to make that money go with him, and people would think twice about the NIL and making sure he was committed to the university, because it was never intended to be used as a recruiting tool, correct?
Correct, or a form of inducement. So, if it was only a matter of time before, to me, that it would come down to the high school level. I live in a area of Ohio where there are factories here. There's some really good high school football places, and I live in Pickerington. They have 5 guys playing for Ohio State right now.
Wow.
So we understand that, and when I'm already talking to my 8th grade son about some of these things, if he was able to play college anything, you just start to have these conversations, because I think some of that NIL at the high school level is going to make entitlement worse at the college level. That would be my opinion.
Right.
And when you have guys switching around, now people can do whatever they want with their kids, but I don't think a 9th grader should be paid to play football, not quite yet.
No, I agree. And you know, I've said this before, the reason that this thing's out of control is because everybody turned their head and said it's not going to happen. They put their head in the sand, not going to happen. We've got this controlled. And now they're trying to go back and put some of the genie back in the box to see if they can figure out how to make this work. I know there before the North Carolina thing, there were they had to get a judge involved, and he's the one that made the ruling. There were 30 states that were allowing NIL money on the high school level. And what was happening with some of it, and North Carolina allowed it with the independent schools but not the public schools, so they were losing some kids. They were losing kids to next-door states and to private schools because they could get the NIL.
Yeah, and, you know, I get it. Look, up here in Ohio, and I'm sure every state's unique. I remember from living in North Carolina, the public versus private school football thing wasn't as prevalent as it is here in Ohio, because we have some absolute Catholic powerhouses. We have some public school powerhouses. They don't necessarily like each other. I played for a Catholic school, so there's still part of me that was like, when you played a public school, you always wanted to win. But there were different rules, too. We were always accused of recruiting. And when your school didn't, that was something. But now I think the recruiting end goes on at the high school level, no matter what state you're living in. So, yeah, it's something to keep in mind, and that's the underside of this business. And I think it is translating to the college level. I was talking to my son about something else last night, Lanny. I said, yeah, you can be a great 7-on-7 team. It doesn't mean you're a football team. 7-on-7's influence on the game also has been really strong over the last few years.
It's flag football without the flags, basically, is the way it works out.
Yeah, I mean, you could have a good 7-on-7 quarterback, but when you get all 22 out on the field, it could be a little bit different.
The other thing that came down, those of you that's just listening and not watching, talking to Bill Benner, Sporting News, there was another thing that came down, that there's some kind of group that has come up with a situation to realign schools and have two basic divisions, a Power 12 conference with 72 schools, regionalized, 6 schools in each division, and then a group of 8, which would basically be your FCS that you've got now. And the other thing that I really liked about it was the ability for that group of 8 to advance into the what they call the Power 12 conferences, kind of like they do soccer in Europe. But until we get to this situation to where there's a TV deal for this, 72 schools all together, nothing's going to change. Everybody's going to keep poaching. Right now they're already laughing about Cal coming to the East Coast, or, Stanford came to Clemson and played. My daughter and I passed the transfer truck the day before on a Friday when they were coming. They'd come across 40, and they were going down 321, going down to hit 85 and go. And I'm thinking, they came from California with their equipment. Now, when I traveled with Appalachian, we had an equipment truck, and the team flew. But there's no way that can make monetary sense to me, especially with the minor sports.
No, and it's definitely changed the makeup of the game. Now, the Cal-Miami game was fun last week.
Yes.
But it was also short-term. SMU's making an immediate impact.
Yes, they are.
The ACC. I'm sure they're happy about it. You're seeing with we wrote a story yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, Lanny. So if you take the traditional Big Ten schools and these new Big Ten schools on the West Coast and look at their record when traveling, the home team is 8-1.
Yeah.
The road team is 1-8. So you can't tell me, like they were saying, well, that travel won't be a big deal. These are college athletes. They're not NFL athletes.
Well, even the NFL is the same way, though, Bill. You can travel east. I mean, you can travel west, but you don't travel east very well because of the time.
Correct. I think it's almost reversed, right?
Yeah.
Like those West Coast teams struggle when they have the 1 p.m. kickoff in Charlotte.
That's
example.
right.
So, yeah, I think the travel factor is very real as we head into Penn State, USC, Oregon, Ohio State, Washington, Iowa this week, and there's one more I'm blanking on, but UCLA also is traveling.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's definitely a lot to deal with.
Yeah, there's good games, and I get it. And the biggest thing the West Coast teams like about this, they get the East Coast exposure that they used to didn't have. You couldn't catch a West Coast game unless you want to stay up to 10:45. Everything was late, but now they've kind of rolled that back. And I never understood why the West Coast games couldn't start at 1 p.m. their time and be a 3:30, 4 o'clock game here. So you get that exposure.
Well, there's two guys at the front of the Heisman race right now that are from the Mountain Time Zone. And that might seem like who cares, but Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter are in that zone. There hasn't been a Heisman winner from the Mountain Time Zone since 1994. So You're on to something there where – remember, Christian McCaffrey should have been in that. Toby Gerhart. That's a great point, that the guys on the West Coast have a little bit harder time getting the Heisman hype. So Ashton Genty's a lot of fun to watch, by the way. He's averaging over 10 yards per carry right now.
Well, I like the pluses to it, and minuses are really heavy because it involves everything else at the school when you realign the conference. This model that folks threw out, and I've said this before, it only affects football. And then you can have smaller regional conferences for everything else. I mean, you might want to throw basketball in there, but, in the ACC, because it's so big, one of the things that everybody misses is there's very few home and home. You used to count on the home and home in the ACC in basketball season, and you don't get that anymore.
Right. And some of the I think we are starting to realize, I was a guy that you could take away the divisions or leave them, but when you take away divisions and you have large conferences, there are going to be weird tiebreakers at the end of the year.
Yeah,
that's going to happen in probably all four conferences because of, I don't want to say it's parity, but like you look at the SEC right now, they have 8 teams with one loss.
Yeah.
The ACC is going to be a jumble at the end of the year. So those are things to watch as we get into the second half of the season.
Do you see expansion or conference pullouts? Clemson and Florida State were on that thing about pulling out. Now, I think Florida State has lost their steam because they're terrible. I mean, they're just not very good. And so I don't know if that's still got momentum or something else will have to happen. But the hard part about it, and I say this all the time, these chancellors and presidents of these universities do not want to give up that control of what happens to their school. And that's what would have to happen.
No.
You'd have to have a national commissioner, a Roger Goodell, if you will.
And the sport I've always thought could use one.
Yes.
Nick Saban would be.
We talk about that all the time. Nick would be great, and I don't think he would be partial to one conference or the other.
No, he wants what's best for the sport, but I don't know if these conferences will do it because, I've said for a couple of years now, these conferences don't look out for college football. The conferences look out for the conferences first.
That's right. Yeah.
And until that changes, and they, on some level, you want to protect your backyard, and the SEC does that, and the ACC and the Big Ten and the Big 12. But they didn't help the Pac-12. Did anybody help the Pac-12? No.
They let it implode.
It's a Darwin-like system, and I don't until that changes. Then we're going to continue to circle around these topics that we continue to talk about. Yeah.
One final question. I'll take you to the NFL because you are in Ohio. What's going to happen with the Cleveland Browns and Deshaun Watson?
Oh, man. It's been a tough go up there, and I don't know. I think they're tied to this contract.
Yes.
So unless they trade him, I don't know that anything's going to change this season. It's been a rough year, obviously. I think the offense has struggled. I think when they get Nick Chubb back, some things could change. But, it's been a rough year in Cleveland, and they are going to try to make it work. I think Deshaun would go before Kevin Stefanski would, but, it's so weird when you watch them go on the run they went on with Joe Flacco last year and all these struggles they have this year. It's been a really stark contrast, and they're probably going to drop to 1-5. They're up against a pretty good Philadelphia team on Sunday.
Philadelphia, you're not sure which one's going to show up. That's the only problem with them. I'm in a couple fantasy leagues, and Jalen Hurts is one of my quarterbacks, and he is definitely not putting up the points that I thought he would put up and has put up in the past.
Right. So, that's the NFL right now, and it kind of ties our conversation together. If you look at the SEC standings with one unbeaten team left, then you go look at the AFC standings with one unbeaten team left. There's more one-loss teams in the SEC, obviously, but it's very similar. We've created this NFL light model, and that's what you're going to get. The Arkansas-Tennessee game was no different than Arizona-San Francisco.
Right.
So, those are things to keep in mind as we get, like I said, as we get into this playoff push.
And the other thing is the impact that college quarterbacks are having now in the NFL in their first year. JT Daniels, I'm trying to think of there's a couple, C.J. Stroud last year. The NFL is starting to mold a little bit because they don't have the feeder system that they had before.
Right. And you know, those are success stories. Jaden Daniels, I didn't think he'd be this good this quick.
Yeah.
Caleb Williams has been pretty good. And now we'll get Drake May at North Carolina, playing for New England this weekend, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah, it's good seeing these young quarterbacks do well early, and it shows that there's arguments both ways. I think these quarterbacks are having a hard time in that 10 to 20-yard box, but that's where I see where the real quarterback is. Anybody can throw when they're open.
Yes.
Can you throw in those tight windows? And right now, Jaden Daniels is doing that.
Yeah. Bill, as always, I appreciate it, sir. Look forward. We can do it next week, kind of get you on a regular schedule. I like having you on, like the input that you bring. You always got your ear to the ground with what's going on, and hope everybody's well, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Hey, no problem.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you.
That's Bill Bender, and Bill was kind enough to come on with us today, and I don't have a whole lot to add to what he said. I just know that he kind of keeps his foot to the ground, ear to the ground, see what's going on. Have a great weekend of football. I know that the high school game on WLON, if I'm not mistaken, is Newton at West Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken. You catch that tonight. I know there were some high schools that had to ask for special waivers to be able to play on Friday because they were saying that you had to have 3 days off before you could play. But I think the majority of those games got moved until today, and they got the waivers. Trying to straighten up from all the damage and the schedules that got messed up from the storm that came in last week. I'll see you again next week. Don't forget the boys will be here in the morning, 8 o'clock, bright and early. They'll give you the breakdown. And until then, I'll see you next week. Have a good one, folks.